I think Paul Rudd must have messed with some of that Thorn magic, cause he hasn't aged in 26 years. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. As part of the 2021 edition of my 13 Nights of Halloween series, today I'm going to be talking about the 1995 slasher sequel, Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all that extra content. Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers stars Donald Pleasence, Paul Rudd, and Marianne Hagan, and was directed by Chappelle. 6 years after the events of Halloween 5, Tommy Doyle and Dr. Loomis must work together to uncover the mystery behind Michael Myers' origins, and stop him before even more damage is done to the Strode family and Haddonfield. With this conclusion to the Thorn trilogy, we have reached one of the strangest and messiest films within the franchise. I know I've said similar things about Halloween 4 and 5, but this sixth film manages to dig itself even deeper into that ditch of absurdity. Like the rest of the trilogy, this is a fairly aptly named film. Dropping the number for the first time in the franchise's sequel history, this movie is simply Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers, which has a bit of a dual meaning when you realize what went on with the production. Unfortunately, the name is just about the only logical thing to be found here. Before I dig too much into the movie, I do want to briefly acknowledge and discuss the production issues that went on with this film, because they certainly had at least a hand in making the film into the mess that it is. Of all of the Halloween films, this is the one with the most behind-the-scenes drama and controversy. There was no one unifying vision for this film. The producers wanted one thing, the writer wanted another, the studio still another, with the director stuck in the middle with yet another different vision for the film. After a poorly received test screening, the movie was chopped up even more, and underwent rewrites and reshoots, resulting in a final product that nobody was entirely happy with, or proud of. Because of all this revision, there are actually different cuts of this film out there. The theatrical cut is the most widely seen, and is the gorier, more over-the-top version that was stitched together with the reshoots. The producer's cut only received its first official release in 2014, and is the slightly longer original cut of the film that was test screened for audiences. I've seen both versions, and personally, I prefer the producer's cut because I think it's slightly more cohesive. Even when taking the production issues into account, this film's extremely rough. It attempts to provide reasoning and explanations, not only for things that were introduced in Halloween 4 and 5, but for Michael Myers' actions throughout the entirety of the franchise, even going back to the original film. That was ambitious, to say the least. On one hand, I almost like that decision, because so much of the franchise and Michael Myers' story has been inconsistent and often illogical. So the prospect of getting an explanation that ties it all together in some sort of logical way is intriguing. But, on the other hand, an explanation takes away from the impact of the Myers character. The mystery of his motivations and the simplicity of the wrong place, wrong time setup of the first film were part of what made it so unsettling. It became a relatable scenario, because it could have happened to anyone. Instead, this film opts for unrelatable complexity, building a bizarre mythos around Michael Myers. The tattoo and the mysterious man in black from Halloween 5 finally get an explanation here, but it's almost laughably ridiculous and out there. To be honest, the idea of the Curse of Thorn is kind of interesting, as was Paul Rudd's Windows 95 PowerPoint presentation about it, but it's just such an absurd story jump within the franchise. Of all of the explanations or origins they could have come up with for Michael Myers, this is what they decided to go with. It's bizarre, but kind of had potential, except they take it too far. Any intrigue the Thorn idea generates gets completely buried by the ickiness of Jamie's role in the story, creating an unpleasant atmosphere right from the opening titles. Much like its predecessors within the trilogy, so much of this film doesn't make any sense. There are way too many plot conveniences, and instances of very specific characters being in the right place, or noticing something obvious that somehow nobody else saw or heard. We get all these extra characters that are sorta tangentially connected to the story, and seem like they're gonna have a purpose, but then don't really. It's also convoluted, and that's before the insanity of the third act. Once that finale hits and the plot twists and revelations come to a head, it's just absurd. Along those same lines, this film feels incredibly disjointed. Again, that's partly a consequence of the reshoots and production troubles, but even the producer's cut is an unclear, jumpy mess. The timeline of this film is especially problematic, with Michael Myers seemingly everywhere at once. There's no sense of time or geography of the town, so you can't really follow the events of the story. You can only consume them. And with all the different subplots and characters competing for screen time and our attention, it's a frustratingly jumbled mess. Even Loomis feels disjointed as a character. He's got his trademark craziness at times, though extremely toned down from the utter insanity of the last film. But his role in the story sporadically changes throughout, and he vacillates between classic yelling, dramatic Loomis and bizarrely calm and tired Dumbledore-esque Loomis. The story here is an absolute mess, but the film does attempt to make some interesting connections to the original film. The producer's cut especially tries to emulate the tone at points, with some of the early Haddonfield scenes. There are also a number of visual callbacks to the original, like Michael being creepy by some sheets hanging on a clothesline, and even the pumpkin drop. The biggest connection, though, is the reintroduction of Tommy Doyle, the little kid Laurie Strode was babysitting in the first movie. Played with creepy intensity by the apparently unaging Paul Rudd in his film debut, Tommy has a surprisingly large role in this story. I actually really like the idea of bringing that character back. I think there was a lot of potential and things to explore because of his experiences and childhood trauma, but his actual role in the story is a little strange here. It's overly convenient and doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but Paul Rudd gave it his all with a pretty solid performance, making the film much more watchable than it otherwise would be. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. The only pro here for me is Tommy Doyle, and not in his entirety. I really like the idea of bringing Tommy back into the fold of the story, and the movie kind of touches on how his experiences affected him, but doesn't dig much deeper than making him kind of creepy and paranoid. But if there was gonna be a way to introduce the Thorn stuff believably, this was it. Cause Tommy sort of puts off this conspiracy theory air, and it's believable that he would obsess over Michael and piece all these ideas together. It's certainly less believable that he would get as involved with the story as he does, and he's played a bit over-dramatically creepy at times, but Paul Rudd's performance here is still one of the highlights. On the con side, there are a lot of issues, but I'm just gonna focus on the really big ones to save time. The first issue is how convoluted this story is. It's been a lingering problem throughout the Thorn trilogy, but this film is definitely the worst offender of the bunch. Once again, there are just so many things that don't make sense. Lapses in logic and reality are expected in a horror film, but this movie just goes crazy with it. It's absolutely loaded with ridiculous plot conveniences. For instance, how was Tommy the only person to notice the massive blood trail through the bus station? It'd be a nitpick if that was the only example, but things like that pop up in the story every couple minutes. And then when you add in the whole Curse of Thorn thing, the film leaps to a point of convoluted no return with its absurdity. Con number 2 can kinda go hand in hand with the first, and is how disjointed this film is. When you're watching the movie, it's obvious that there's no rhyme or reason to half of what's going on. It jumps all over the place, drastically varies in tone, is inconsistent and full of continuity errors. Some of this is inherent to the script and ridiculousness of the story, but a good deal of the issues stems from the production issues and disagreement between the producers, studio, director, and writer. There was no clear vision for what this film would be, so even the original producer's cut is a mess. And then that was reshot and hacked up to produce the theatrical cut, which only exacerbated the aimless, random, and disjointed nature of the film. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, or any of the other films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, 1.5 out of 5 paws. I always consider giving it 2 paws, at least the producer's cut, but the more I think about it, the more I dislike it. This is a convoluted mess that attempts to explain the messiness left behind from the previous films, but only ends up making it worse. I would recommend Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, only to Halloween completionists. This is the third film of the Thorn trilogy, and the part that actually finally gets into the Thorn stuff. So if you're invested in that story arc from Halloween 4 and 5, you might as well watch this to finish it, but don't expect anything satisfying. There's a reason this movie is a dead end in the franchise, and that the 7th film retconned everything that happened after Halloween 2. If you liked Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers, I would suggest Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers. That was the start of the Thorn trilogy, and the best of the 3 films, not only introducing Jamie, but also paying homage to the original 1978 film. If you really liked the culty stuff here, and want to stick with the Halloween franchise, you might want to watch Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. That one's a bit of an outlier in the franchise, being the only movie without Michael Myers, and the only one with heavy sci-fi influences, but you might enjoy certain elements of the villain scheme. And if you like Tommy Doyle here, you should check out Disturbia. That's another horror thriller film that features a guy creepily watching his neighbor's house and coming up with elaborate theories. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite movie featuring a cult? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate it if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe while you're at it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainly Movies, the way life should be.